All right, I'm recording. This is September 17th, and I'm not going to post a new assignment because you've already got everything laid out, the final CodeHS and the final project. And some people might be working on those, or you might be one step before that. Either way is okay. We got 2 weeks from right now until the end of the quarter. So I'm going to open up this guy and look at an example. Functions and exceptions in CodeHS. So let's go here, scroll down, and we can pick one or maybe pick two to show how these work in general and what kind of issues you might run into. Let's see. The first one is almost too easy. Functions, you write a couple lines and then you give it a name. So like your hello world or something, you might call that message or hello world, and then you call that up and say, hey, let's run this chunk of code, and it'll do it. And on its own, that's not too interesting, but let's go to the second one where you have parameters, meaning the stuff in parentheses after the function. We've seen that with print. You put in whatever you're going to print. We've seen that with input. You put in the prompt is what they call it. We've seen it with range, for example. Range can have one parameter, or it can have a couple more if you add the start and stop and the interval and things like that. So let's pick one. I think this one is what someone asked about last time, and let's do that. Print multiple times is a nice little short function here. It's going to say, oh, there's when I typed an example. Let's get rid of that. It's going to say, write a function that takes two arguments, a string and an integer, and prints the string multiple times. The integer specifies how many. So it's going to say, like, we're going to send it a message and then send it how many times. If you say hi and then 3, it'll go hi, hi, hi. If you said, you know, Pokemon and 5, it would say Pokemon 5 times. That is not hard to do, but we got to arrange it in the right way. Okay, so let's say I'm going to hit enter a couple times to get down in the middle, because often you want to write your code out of order. You want to say what's going to happen and then go back and set it up before and, you know, bounce around. I always like to do that. So let's say I'm going to call it print x times because I think it's nice and shorter, and it still gives you the same idea. And so I'm going to call this for what's a word? Somebody just give me a random word that would be funny. Anything. Stalagmite. Taco. Okay. Taco and 5. Okay. Now, this is not the function. This is just once we have the function, we're going to invoke it. We're going to call it up. But I wanted to do that first just to say, like, this is the only loose code that's floating around with no block that it's inside of or nothing that it's attached to. Okay, this is what you call like in the main part of your program. Now here, let's actually make the function that's going to be called up. And the way to do that is very, very simple. It's just def. Def means you're going to define. Okay, you don't need to say what kind, or you don't need to use any fancy symbols. That's one reason why we like Python as opposed to other languages, but you do have to keep in mind certain things. Okay, so we're going to say print x times is going to be our name, and then in parentheses it's going to be the parameters. You may notice, if you're really on the ball, that they've used the word parameters like over here, but then they use the word arguments like over here, and it seems to be talking about the same thing, right? Well, parameters, that's the stuff that's going to go in these parentheses. That's like the definition. You're going to say what kind of thing is going to go in this slot, and what name are we going to give it in general. But argument, that's the stuff that goes here. That's like what we're sending to the function this specific time, okay? So it's sort of like the slot versus the thing that goes in the slot. It's the name versus the value, you know. So I'm going to call the first thing message because, I don't know, that just seems to make sense to me, but you can call it other stuff. Don't use the word string and the word integer because those are already keywords and you don't want them to mix with like the name of the type or whatever. And then for how many times, I'm going to call that x because I've already put that in the name and I think it sort of makes sense. But you could do whatever you want. And then just like when you're making some if statements, just like when you're doing a loop, we have colon. Colon says, hey, this is the name of a thing, and the next couple lines are going to be part of it. And whenever you do colon, if you hit enter in this particular editor, and in most, it will automatically indent your guy. So now, whatever we put in here, if anybody ever calls up print x times, that stuff is going to run with these particular values. So we don't have to create the message variable. We don't have to create the x. They've already been sent to us. We can assume that in this little universe of the function, we already know what message is because somebody sent it to us, and we already know what x is because somebody sent it to us. So that makes it really easy to write this code. We don't have to get those. We don't have to do input or whatever. We're just going to say, hey, take this stuff and do it. So they recommend a for loop, and I'm going to use that. It's not the only way to do it. There are always multiple ways. There are always infinite ways to do these things, but that is obviously the most efficient. So let's say for I in range x, that's a little ugly. Maybe we could rephrase that, but we're going to print message, okay? And I could indent that again, but since it's just a tiny little guy, I can make it the same line. And either way works. So now when you call this up, it's going to print this many times, which is exactly what we want. And I know that sounds weird, like you could just do that outside of here. Why are we making a function? But the greatness of a function is that now we could call it up anywhere. If this was going to be a program that often had to print this kind of thing, where it would get a word and then how many times, and it would print the word x time, then it would save us a ton of time by making it its own little guy with a name, and then we call up that name whenever we need to do that thing. Whenever we make a bigger program, there are things that happen over and over, and we need to give them a name and then bring those things up. So for example, if you're making a game, maybe you need to check if your character bumps into a wall. Not just once, but every time anything happens, you got to check if your character bumps into a wall. Then we'll give that a name, call it, collision or something, and then call that up whenever we need. And then you don't have to copy any lines of code. You don't have to add it in multiple places. You just do it once. We got it. So is this going to work? I don't know. Maybe I forgot something. Let's see. Yeah, it's going to say this 5 times, but let's test it with some other stuff just in case. Somebody give me another word, just another random word. Skeleton or zombie, okay. And let's say another number, let's say 7. Just test it with multiple things just in case. And that one seems to work great. So let's go see if it likes it. Hey, it does. Okay. So Was there another one that any of you guys wanted to look at? I'm not getting anything. Let's go to the next section just in case. Namespaces is interesting. So looking back here, this parameter list right here, message and X, you can use those inside of the function and they'll take whatever got sent to them. But those only exist in here. Okay, if I used message floating outside of it, it wouldn't work. So I could say like new thing equals message. It's not going to know what that means because message only exists inside of here. So that's what that unit is about. Or let's check one. Let's just take a look. Fix this program. Have I zoomed to make the text huge? I guess I have. In the editor is a buggy program for the program outlined below. Find the bug and fix it. This should take two numbers and print the sum. Hey, that's not too hard. But it's not working. So it's going to say add nums is a function they made, and it takes two guys and it adds them up. Great. But if you try to run it, it's not getting anything because when you print sum, it doesn't know what that means. Outside of this function, sum doesn't connect to the stuff in here, okay? This is what you call a local variable. Everything in here is just local to this, and you don't have access to them from outside of it, from loose code in the main part or from other functions or whatever. They're just doing their own little job in their own little world. And so how could we do this? We want to print the guy that we got from this function, but we can't reach inside of this function and do that. So luckily, there are a ton of ways we could fix this, okay? We could make a variable sum and then say, hey, in this function, we're going to use the variable called sum, and it's a global one, and we're going to edit it, and then it's going to be affected permanently, and then we can use it, blah, blah, blah. That's a little ugly. We don't want to do that most of the time. So what else could we do? We could print it while we're inside of the function instead of over here. And that works too. Okay. Then they're just doing the job inside of it and you don't need any stuff. Let's make sure that worked. Hey, it works. Or let's see if that other one works. I think it does, but global stuff you don't want to mess with too much. Or another way you could do it is you could have this function send the answer back to us. Just like how we sent the parts to it. We said, hey, you're going to use 5 and 6 in your calculation. You could say, hey, send me back the answer. And then it's no longer trapped inside the function in its own little box. It's something we get. And the way to do that is to use the word return. Okay. And then you use that as its own little guy. So I just showed 3 ways to get around this issue. I don't know which one they were aiming for. Let's see if it likes that one. Yeah, okay. But as I've said, there are always infinite ways to do your job, to fix things. I think what they wanted is to print it inside the function, and then we're doing exactly the same stuff, just in the right order. But anyway, it's okay. Now, they're going to show you the return stuff, and they're going to show you the other way. And they might show you talk about global variables. And they might, who knows, do other stuff too. But that's the general idea. So that was 2 examples. This video is getting to be about 15 minutes. I'll end it here, but I'll post more next time and we'll have updates as we go. Thanks.